My name is John Fisher, and I'm a Cree of Cowessess First Nation. My family, we belong to that. And the director of the Niskum Center, Mount Royal University. It's my privilege to introduce Niganawidinam James Sinclair. He's Professor, Native Studies, Department Head, University of Manitoba. Dr. Nigan is Anishinaabe, originally from Little Peguis Indian settlement near Selkirk, Manitoba, and is the current head of the Department of Native Studies. He's an international commentator on Indigenous issues for outlets like Al Jazeera, The Guardian, national broadcasters like CTV, CBC, The Globe and Mail, and was named one of Manitoba's top 40, under 40, in 2015. I'm striving to be top 60, bottom 60, over 60? How does that work? Nigan is an award-winning speaker, writer, and editor of such books as The Winter We Danced, Voices of the Past, the Future, and the Idle No More movement. Dr. Sinclair obtained his BA in Education at the University of Winnipeg before completing an MA in Native and African American Literatures at the University of Oklahoma, and a PhD in First Nations and American Literatures from the University of BC. Today he's going to talk about learning from the water, how to build an Indigenous university, and my hope is to take many things away from him today. Please welcome Dr. Sinclair.
All right. How's everybody doing? You good? So I want to start off by saying, miigwech to everybody, and I'm going to grab my coffee over there. Miigwech to everybody for having me out. This is my third time at Mount Royal, and so really love being here. I love your campus. I love all the work. I want to acknowledge we're on Treaty 7 territory, and my relations out here, the many relations that make up part of Treaty 7, as well as all my Métis relations, of course, that come all the way out into the Red River Settlement, the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm going to talk briefly about a whole bunch of things, and this is a talk that I'm building upon in my many roles as a department head, and many of you have sort of said, hey, you're taking on this new role as department head. Yeah, so I'm like I'm living an administrative nightmare. So I was like sitting over there having a wonderful morning, and then boom, my phone's exploding for all the fires. I got a 4-page email on a student wanting a B+ instead of a B. That was fun. That's what my life is all about now. And so it's really an incredible opportunity to be out here and to spend time with you actually talking about my research and my work. For those of you that caught my talk last year in the Indigenous Knowledge Symposium, I realized about a week ago that I talked about the water then. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that talk, but I don't want to repeat for anyone else that are here. There's a lot of people who have had that talk too, so I'm not going to repeat anything from that talk, but I am going to sort of gesture to some ideas. But I want to give a little plug to this afternoon's plenary where my colleagues from Manitowoc are coming to speak about the power of the water, and I'm going to talk about why that's important and why many of us in Manitowoc are bringing that message to here in Alberta as well, and to many of the treaty territories. So when I greet you, and you can see the very small font over here, I would say, Bonjour Denwe Maganaduk, Nigon Wewedum Nijnakas, Namagoshin Do Dem, Anishinaabe and Dao, St. Peter's and Donji, Nimen Wendam Omayayan. All of those things are what you need to know about what. Notice I didn't say CBC's top 40 under 40. I'm not 40 anymore, by the way, so I really just hold that just dearly to my heart. I remember when I was below 40, I remember But everything that I've said to you is the stuff that really matters in terms of who I am, where I come from, my family, my territory, my relations. And I want to talk about that particular phrase at the very end. So if you take a look at the phrases at the end, Nimenwendam Omayayan. Nimenwendam Omayayan is, for us as Anishinaabe peoples, I'm going to talk about Anishinaabe in just a minute, but for Anishinaabe peoples, it's one of the most important phrases that we have. Because what it says is Nimenwendam, I am joyous. Oma, for all the things, for all of the things, Ayayan, that have happened to bring me here, that right here, Ayayan, this space, this place. And so I want to acknowledge all of the things that have happened to lead me to right here. And I want everyone just to think for a moment of the things that have happened from the time you woke up to when you got here. You could have turned right instead of left. This could have happened, could have made this decision instead of this decision, maybe to go somewhere else. Then I want you to think of all the things that influenced you, even outside of your control. The weather, the sun, the sky, the wind, the rain, everything that have happened that has led you to this place. When I was flying in last night, it was raining from Winnipeg. And if you think about it, just the past 24 hours for me, there's been a million things that have happened that led me to right here. And then if I think about all the things my ancestors chose and all the things my peoples, my communities chose, and then even before I was born, my parents made a decision to have a night out. The hockey game was on. And then, next thing you know, I came along. And then I want you to, think about all the things that have happened to you in the exact same way. There is an infinite amount of possibilities, but yet here we are standing right here. Just feel that for a moment. Feel the gravity of that amazingness, that infinite set of possibilities that have led us to right here. Nimenwendam Omayayan. It is a complete honor, a total honor to be here. It's a fluke. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that we are all here right now in this moment at this time. Now I want you to just feel that for a moment, but also feel the incredible beauty of that opportunity. Because the beauty of that opportunity is you have all the power. You have all the opportunity to make that next step, to make that next choice. Nimenwendam Omayayan, you are joyous to do it because it's amazing that you have this opportunity. This opportunity matters because it is you that will take that step. I cannot take that step for you. You cannot take that step for somebody else. You must make that next step forward, and you have the opportunity to do it. What a beautiful day. What a beautiful, beautiful opportunity. You can do anything you want with that next step. Absolutely anything. Now, I also said something really important that I want us to acknowledge, or I want to acknowledge you, is I want to acknowledge all of you as my relations. So I said, Bojun Dinawe Maganaduk. I didn't say Bojun Nawicha Waganak. Bojun Nawicha Waganak would be, hello, my friends. You're not my friends, you are my family. Bojun Dinawe Maganaduk. You are my family, you are my relatives. And here's why you are my relatives. You are my relatives because we share this incredible, bountiful family of water. This beautiful bounty of water that ends up in our territory in Manitowabal. One of the reasons why I encourage you to go and listen to my cousins and my sisters who will be speaking this afternoon in the plenary on water is that it is Manitowabal where your water ends up. What we put in the soil, what we put in the river system, ends up in Lake Winnipeg, the clouded water. What makes the water clouded is that algae, that phosphorus, that minerals, all of the things from the shampoo on our heads to the pig fertilizer to the oil that we pull out of the ground ends up in the water in Manitowabal. That's going to matter later for what we are doing in Manitowabal. We are also having some struggles and reminding ourselves of that power as well. But that water that is ending up in Manitowabal makes us all family. We may come from different treaties, we may even come from what we call provinces now, but we are family because we share this unique relationship together. What happens here affects us here in Manitoba. You know, another word for that is a family. What happens upstairs also happens downstairs. You ever been in a family where there's been maybe sometimes an argument? Maybe it starts with two people, and then eventually it's the whole family's involved, right? Or maybe, you also share food together. You share time. All of these things really matter. Now, our elder spoke this morning about, and gave this beautiful prayer, but also spoke about a whole bunch of teachings involving that beaver bag, as well as you heard a beautiful song as well. Now, I can't emphasize to you enough, and this is one of my sort of soapbox moments, is that at this time, this moment that we are in as a project or a village or Kanata, the village, the community, this interesting moment we are on is really important to think about, because in those moments when people gift you things, when people offer you things and you accept it, I love that idea of acceptance, the actual physical acceptance of a prayer. When you accept those things by giving the time, the gift of your space and your listening, you are participating in something very vast and very old, tens of thousands of years old, as my colleague Liam said. These things matter. So for example, I want you to take a look here. That's at Meech Lake. At Meech Lake, when Brian Mulroney took that pipe. That's not just a protocol thing. That's not just something we go, yeah, we put up a nice sign at the front of the building saying we're treaty people. It's a physical, lifelong, ideological commitment to another person when you take that pipe. When you take that pipe with someone else, you are committing to a lifelong relationship, whatever that relationship meant in that time period. And so when the Prime Minister asks young Thieland to give a song when the cabinet is walked in for the first time, that's not just showy Disney stuff. That is significant, because it is a pivotal change. It's an opportunity for the cabinet to participate in a process that is tens of thousands of years old and doesn't start in 1867. It is significant when we say things like we are treaty peoples, or when we offer medicine, when we offer tobacco. When we offer tobacco, it is a teaching about relationship. It's a journey. When somebody offers you tobacco, you are committing to them for the entirety of that relationship, however that be, whether that be 5 minutes, whether that be 10 years, whether that be an entire lifetime. Bonjour dinawe maganaduk. Hello, my relations. These things all come with this incredible beauty, this incredible opportunity, and these incredible gifts that you can receive. Now, I don't want to bore you too much, but this morning I was looking at the sunrise, sorry. I was looking at the sunset. But I was looking at the sunset when I was flying over. But I was looking at the sunrise this morning. I was thinking about the sunrise ceremony. The sunrise ceremony that we do as Anishinaabe people is everything you need to know about education. Everything you need to know about what I'm going to talk about in this talk, which is how do we build an Indigenous university? What does that look like? Is it even possible? Do we decolonize, or do we indigenize? That's kind of the big struggle. That's all these administrative meetings that I'm into. What do we do next? Well, the sunrise ceremony is the most important ceremony for us. It's the first ceremony that we raise the water, and we also gift our tobacco. We make a commitment for the day. What we turn to the sun is, and what we say is, miigwech for coming, miigwech to you for coming, and we hope you come tomorrow. And if you come tomorrow, we will be here to wait for you. That commitment of that ceremony is everything you need to know about a journey, and which is really what education's all about, right? Education is taking a step, trying to go in a direction, learning, sometimes stumbling, but ultimately taking so many steps that you turn around and go, wow, look at all these things that have happened. We might call them degrees, we might call them diplomas. But what we're really talking about is we're talking about a journey that you've taken through a set of understandings, trying to figure something out, maybe to get a credential to be able to share that knowledge with somebody else. Well, journeying, traveling, and learning along the way is everything Anishinaabe is all about. So I come from the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe people are also known as the Ojibwe, or the Soto, the Bungi in certain areas of Manitoba. But one of the ways we define ourselves is as the spontaneous people. And we traveled. Starting in 700, what would be called 700 AD. We were in Abenaki Confederacy out in New York. And we started to travel. We got a prophecy of there would be people coming on that side. So we said, well, let's make some room for them. And so we began to travel. And as we began to travel across North America, we met many people along the way. But one of the names that we adopted for ourselves is we referred to ourselves as the spontaneous people, the people that would constantly be remaking themselves as we met more. As we met somebody, we would remake ourselves according to what we had learned from that experience. The spontaneous people, of course, if you know spontaneity, like think about things you've done that are spontaneous, like maybe you spontaneously jumped in a car and drove somewhere, right? Or maybe spontaneously you did this. Or in my case, I was a high school teacher and I just cut my hair, quit my job, drove to Oklahoma, did a master's. And my dad was like, what are you doing again? What are you doing? I was a high school teacher and he's like, you're giving up the job to go and do some US college? I was, yeah, let's just try it. And so the spontaneous people are a people that are continually remaking themselves because spontaneity doesn't come without cause. Spontaneity always has purpose. Now, many of the people that we met along the way were people like these people, the Cahokia, the people of the Mississippian Cahokia people. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this for a moment is that it's not talked about a lot, but it may be in Indigenous Studies classes, but massive civilizations existed for tens of thousands of years before any European had even a glimmer or an idea that North America even existed. And one of the largest cities, in fact, larger than England, as of 700 CE or AD or whatever you want to call it was Cahokia. This civilization had things like a sewer system. It had holy sites. It had hunting, large sports stadiums. Had big, huge burial sites as well. But the most important thing that it had secondary institutions and post-secondary institutions. It had universities. Cahokia was a massive educational complex. It was a place where people came, both seasonally, and there was permanent settlement there as well, and they came to learn, to philosophize, to think, to rationalize, and ultimately to write about their experiences in the universe. Now, another word for that is we might call it a city, but I won't get into debating about cities and the massive civilization. Undoubtedly, it was a civilization. And it was a civilization, really, not all that different than this one. Now, at the same time Cahokia is going on in North America, there's this massive, the Greeks are out there, Plato, Aristotle, they're all sitting there and they're thinking. And they're doing work. And it's important to reflect upon the history of Greek tradition when we talk about universities, because the history of Greek tradition comes from this belief in empirical, rational, objective thought. And Plato, if we give Plato the lion's share of the attention on why that came to be, it comes from a tradition of a real break with God. And the position of Plato was that he was emerging from was that God had somehow, I don't know if I would say it, abandoned, but certainly had become at a distance to civilization, and that the invention of his great treatise, the Plato's Cave, is the premise that we can never assert or have an idea of the Word of God. Therefore, all we have access to are the forms or the shadows on the cave wall. Now, I don't want to bore you all with, go to philosophy class, check it out. But the so-called great civilization has a fundamental principle at work which forms the basis for knowledge, how we define knowledge. And what that means is that God has a distance to humanity, and that we can somehow see glimpses or possibilities of knowledge that God has invested into creation, but yet we never can quite get there. We only see the shadows on the wall. This is the fundamental principle of the separation between church and state. If we look to, Donald Trump notwithstanding, the United States and Canada in many ways likes to pretend that it has a separation between church and state. It has this belief that we have to separate church and state. Well, that comes from that position, that idea that knowledge must remain objective and rational and empirical, and that our institutions of higher learning, notice this Christian symbiology with the language, higher learning, and that we pursue knowledge. Knowledge doesn't pursue us. We pursue it. We pursue to have a sense, and if we can reason out the meaning of God, therefore we can get to truth, or we can get to the shadows that will give us a sense of truth. The reason why I tell you this is that for Indigenous civilization, this moment never happened. This break between God and the world, or Gege Manado and creation, the creator and creation, never occurred. This ideological break on defining knowledge as being something you reason according to the shadows on the wall, which never quite gets you to God, never happened for Indigenous people. For Indigenous people, what we saw was a fundamental, ongoing, consistent connection with the Creator. And that connection is fundamentally instilled into every aspect of creation. And our job is to make a close relationship with every aspect of creation, from the water to the trees to the plants to the animals. And it is through that relationship that we then ascertain knowledge. To separate that into church and state is almost impossible. It's like to say, well, how do you invent shadows when there's no shadows? When we're not looking for the shadows, we're looking to the thing itself. Now, this is important because to understand the history of Indigenous education is this break, is to impose the idea of defining knowledge onto Indigenous peoples, forcefully so through the residential school system, but through a variety of other means, now called universities and secondary institutions, and treatises that say such things as Indigenous knowledge doesn't exist, or is uncivilized, or is unempirical, or unrational, or irrational, or a bunch of quack kaplooey. That premise is in the same spectrum that residential schools presides. And that Indigenous knowledge is still seen as that inferior, superstitious belief that we can somehow have in touch with creation. Because that idea of Plato's cave and that distance to creation still is with us. Now, if we were to invest in this idea of reconciliation, if it's a possibility, if that's something we're going to do, it will start in our institutions of knowledge, our places of knowledge, how we define knowledge, how we teach it, how we think about it, and ultimately, how do we act? Now, this guy right here, to the right, I happen to be related to him. I taught him everything he knows. So my dad, who's the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he has a famous saying where he says, education is what got us in this mess over the past 150 years. Education will get us out of it. And I fundamentally believe that. I believe that there may be a time to break some windows. There may be a time to go to other parties, like the United Nations, but ultimately it will be education that will create the revolution in this country. As my friend John says to me, education begins in language, revolutions begin in language. So let's talk about a university. Let's talk about what it looks like. Now, a university, I happen to be an admin, so I don't want to bore you all, but basically university boils down to three parts. There's research, the stuff that we do to go and investigate knowledge. There's teaching, when we go and get the knowledge, and we then go and share it. How do we share it in places like classroom, but also in things like books, maybe in things like dissemination projects, whatever. And then ultimately service. So the third part of your job as a university member is you have service responsibilities. You have to go out into the community. Now, this is what it looks like. Here's what universities look like, right? Universities look like places where you go to class, you study. I have a big intro class that I teach of 200 students. I have graduate seminars, sometimes 15 students. This is what it kind of looks like, right? Institutions of higher learning, big block buildings, people walking around with books, that kind of thing. Okay, well, if we were to imagine for a moment, what does an Indigenous university look like that perhaps comes from a different place than the Platonic tradition of looking for the shadows on the wall, it begins to look like this. It is in the everyday, to the ceremonial, to the lifelong practices that exist all throughout Indigenous communities throughout Turtle Island. The act of tobacco offering is an educational process. The act of berry picking is an educational process. The act of building, sustaining, living in a community, building a lodge for that community, teaching that community. That all of those things are education focused. In fact, I was trying to come up with an idea of a list of all the things that would constitute an Indigenous educational practice, and I had to come up with this statement. It's everything. It's from the moment you get up, do the sunrise ceremony, to the moment you walk down the street, to the moment you're on the internet, to the moment that you're writing your book, or you're writing your letter, or you're writing your email, every aspect of your life is an educational process. Every aspect of every step that you take is an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to gift to creation the things that you have learned. Nimenwendam omayayin. So an Anishinaabe university looks like this. So, I mean, I'll give you a sort of a sense of what an Anishinaabe university would look like if we were to do a physical structure, because that's what we kind of think of, right? We think of a physical structure, and maybe this is what it looks like. This is a Medewan lodge. This is a lodge where we do our ceremonies. We spend most of our time, we raise our children. We go there 4 times a year. We used to live in them, but nowadays we live in houses. We travel there 4 times a year. This is the premise of what an Indigenous university looks like. This is if I showed it to you and I said, here's the strategic plan of the Medewan University, or the Anishinaabe University. Here's the strategic plan. Here's the 3 parts. It comes together in parts. We do outreach in other parts. And then ultimately, the purpose of it, the structure itself, the agamic of itself, the roundedness of itself, is an interaction with all of creation, which is the service model. Now, that's a little esoteric, maybe a little hard to figure out. It's like maybe a little tough to explain. But let me break it down. Now, to understand what I mean when I say research, you have to understand how the Anishinaabe view creation. And I'll do a really quick version of this. Because for us, this is our creation story. Usually takes 4 days to tell, so you guys all ready? And a lot of sand, we gotta write it out. We also got to sit there at the end, and we got to have food, we got to feast it, we got to have a drum, we got to have a tobacco, we got to have 4 tellers, so that's why it takes often 4 days, because you got to have 4 tellers. You can't have just one, you have 4 tellers to tell the creation story. But I'll tell you the quickie version, okay? So for Anishinaabe, creation begins with nothing. Nothing. But nothing is something, right? Isn't nothing something? Because something is nothing. Nothing that's something is something, right? Right, good. This is called Anishinaabe philosophy. Now, that nothing that was something was a great, beautiful being, and that being was called Gije Manado, what we call the creator. Gije, vast, Manado. Manado means, often means spirit, Manitoba. But what we actually mean it to mean is it means essence. It means the essence of all things. Manito. So the Gije Manado. Gije Manado, in a moment, in a chance moment, heard a sound. And that sound sounded like 2 rocks coming together. Now that sound looked like this. Here's what it looked like. Because in that moment that Gije Manado heard that sound, she went, okay, wow, I see something. And for the first time, she saw something from that sound of those 2 things coming together. At the first moment when something that was nothing but became something, it was a sound. It was 2 things coming together. Remember that teaching. That's a really important teaching, because 2 things that come together to make something else. Now, Gije Manado looked into that something and said, whoa, that's amazing. And she saw the most beautiful thing that she's ever seen in her entire life. The most beautiful thing that she'd ever seen. You know what that was? Do you know what that was? You know what she saw? She saw you. She saw you. She saw you. And she saw you. She saw all of you. She saw you in a moment. But she saw the completeness of you. She saw everything that you are. She saw the bad and the good, and all the things that would happen in your life, all the things that happened before your life and the things that would happen after your life. She saw it all. And she said, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. That you would be sitting here in September 2016, and she saw you. She saw you right now. And she said, what an incredible gift. That's amazing. It's so incredible. It's like an artist who sees a painting in her head. She goes, I want to make that. So I'm going to make this beautiful, beautiful thing. And so she did. She began by making it 1 part at a time. 1 part at a time. Each part of creation was made separately. Boom, the sun, the moon, the stars, the sky, the wind, the directions, the land, the water, the earth, plants, the animals, every part of creation. It was like a big party, eh? Anyone been to a big party before? Yeah, so you got to clean up, eh? You got to clean up your house a little bit. You get all the dirty clothes off the floor. Get the table, put the cheesies out. Put Led Zeppelin on, right? So Gajemana got all of creation ready for you, right? And she got all creation ready because she said, you're going to be here, and so I'm going to make it all ready for you. And so she made it all of this beautiful creation around. And creation looked so vast and beautiful. It looked just like this. So there's this amazing, beautiful place. But she noticed something. She noticed something that it wasn't quite ready for you yet, because that creation looked like this. What's the difference between this and this creation? It's not moving. There's no movement. It's beautiful, but there's no movement. It's like a fixed picture. It's like a painting. And so Gajemana said, oh, well, the thing I saw was a constant series of movement. This thing that I saw, I need to make this image of constant movement. And so she picked up every part of creation, and she blew into it a special and unique gift called a bundle. And these things gave each part of creation its special uniqueness. Now, when you've been to a party and it's like full, there's lots of people around, so she adds into the sun comes in, sun's really loud, hey, turn up Led Zeppelin, let's go. And the moon's like, all right, where's the Cheetos? And so everybody comes into creation, but what happens, you ever been to a party that's really full? What happens when you keep adding people? Start getting pretty tight, and everyone's got to kind of move. Every time there's one new person added, everyone's got to move over a little bit. Well, it caught into this constant set of movement until finally Gajemana looked down and saw it's almost perfect. But yet, everything, there is one more thing I need to add, and that thing is human beings. And that human beings was the last part of creation. That was the last part that she saw, and so human beings had been created. And human beings, too, were invested with special and unique gifts. And set down into creation. And everybody began a series of consistent and always infinite connections and movements. And that's how creation came to be. Now I want you to think about that story for a moment. For Anishinaabe, if everything is connected, and you've heard that kind of stereotype phrase before, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. If everything's in a circle, yeah, I've heard that before too. Well, for us, that is the idea of Bagajigan, or Bagajigan, depending where you stand. It means gifts. And what it means is that creation is a consistent set of gift giving. It is a series of infinite connections, like that drum. So if you take a look on that drum, one of our teachings of our drum is to remind us of what makes creation. What sound does a drum make? Life. Creation is an infinite series of interconnectedness. There's not one part of that drum that isn't connected to another. It's like a spider web over here. So I'll take a look here. Do I have a little red dot thingy? Every part of creation is connected. So this part is connected to this part, is connected to this part, is connected to this part. And it does so through a series of gift-giving and interrelationships, because the best relationships are connected through gifts. Now, I want you just to think of 4 random things in creation. Let's go fish, bear, water, and algae. Well, those 4 things are connected because of the gifts that they offer to one another. The bears offer territory and their relationship with water, which creates algae. Algae gives gifts to water. Water gives gifts to fish. And fish, of course, give their bodies to bear. I know that because I'm Fish Clan, and my partner is Bear Clan, and I get eaten all the time. Okay. Now, there's a kind of an important teaching that has to do here, but I won't, instead of boring you too much more, is that philosophically, these are the 2 principles of what we believe to be Enowendowin. Everything is connected. There is infinite connections throughout creation, and that it is to understand those connections that give us a sense of wawayak. Another word for wawayak is the way we see a home or a roundedness, a complete system. Everything is in a system, and everything is connected, and there is infinite connections between all things. Your job, our job, is to investigate how things are connected. So if we go back to the bear, fish, water and algae. That's a good scientist, isn't it? And Anishinaabe people did that for thousands of years because we investigated the innuendoin of Wawayak. The innuendoin, how things are connected between things, and then ultimately we published that research. And the way that we publish that research is in our lodges, is in our tobacco, is in our berries, is in the picking of berries. We published that research in the ways in which we gifted things into creation. I'm going to talk about another way we publish in just a minute. But that is an indigenous research model. It is an infinite set of relationship-making mechanisms throughout creation that give you a sense of understanding, oh, this is how this is connected to this, but also how this is connected to this. That is a publishable paper. And I'll put my tobacco down. What an amazing gift that I just learned. Now, teaching and learning is the second part of the university, and that probably gets some of the lion's share of the treatment. The ultimate questions of teaching is, what's knowledge? Where do we find it? And then ultimately, how do we share it? How do we participate? How do I teach you to participate it? Well, this is a library, right? At a university, what's the apex of power? The president's office likes to think it's that, but it's not. It's a library. The library is the place in which knowledge is archived. The library is the place that knowledge is recognized. And ultimately, it is the library that is the place of power. What goes in the library is the place that knowledge is recognized. If you don't go in the library, it's somewhat unrecognizable in most post-secondary institutions. Now, this is the library of today, right? I know this because my students say, I don't go to the library. I have students who go, yeah, I publish papers, I don't go to the library. Well, I think the library is changing, and it's changing to an electronic kind of model, but yet universities are still built on this model, which I think says something about universities. Universities are still built on a textual model of libraries, of archiving, but yet the world is moving in a much different direction. So whether universities can keep up or not, I think will be interesting to watch. But if this is the place of power for universities, if knowledge is centered around this space, if this is where we seek, we publish, if this is where you're rewarded tenure, how much stuff you can put in there, if this is where we send students to go, okay, get off your computer, go to this place, this is the place where the real knowledge presides. The problem is that this is only 1/100th of an indigenous knowledge system, of how we see knowledge. Think back to the creation story. It is these places where knowledge is archived, where knowledge is available, and ultimately knowledge will be published. It is 1% of 100% that makes the library, which makes universities almost irrelevant. It makes universities almost out of touch with what's actually going on in creation. Because for indigenous knowledge systems, for indigenous communities, for tens of thousands of years, this was the university. This was the library. This was the place knowledge was sought. This was the place that knowledge was engaged with, and ultimately this was the place where knowledge was published. Now, before I get into any sort of tearing into the university, it's important to recognize that there are many different ways that we can encapsulate our relationship with creation that kind of looks like university knowledge. And that if we invest ourselves in the idea of going, okay, well, if creation is one big archive, if creation is one big place that we can engage learning, and knowledge is available all throughout creation through a sense of Enowendoin and Wawayak, that the system is complete, and Enowendoin is where we go and we find all of our connections with things. Well, we do it through experience, time, commitment, generosity, gifts, listening, and communicating, and ultimately it's relationships. That's just a word for a good class. Think about your classes. Think about the classes that you take. The best classes that you have offer all of those things. They offer experiences to you, and they show you how to show time and commitment to your work, and be generous, give gifts to your work, and also bring some of the gifts back from the work that you've been gifted. And listen and communicate, or as my uncle says, listen twice as much as you speak. That's how you learn. Now, indigenous peoples, through teaching, while we want to give the lion's share of treatment to, to universities that are able to deliver classes like that, Indigenous peoples have been writing about this for tens of thousands of years. You know how literacy is the barometer of civilization, and that the number one argument for removal of Indigenous peoples off territories, according to the doctrine of discovery, or terra nullius, why we're uncivilized is because we were illiterate? No, we weren't. We were the most literate peoples in the world. We wrote things down on birch bark, on stone, on sand, on rock. This right here, this is a migration story. This is the same map that I showed you earlier of the Anishinaabe. This is a story of creation by the Anasazi. This is a story of path, science, astronomy by the Mayan civilization, the Aztec codice. This is a story keeping track of all of the things that have happened in the community. This is a history document. It's also called an encyclopedia. And here are the rock paintings of Manitoba, which tell stories of, they're basically road signs-ish. They're telling you what happens here, how it happens, and then ultimately how does it relate to all of the other things? Because there are tens of thousands of other rock images all throughout the Great Lakes that connect to the ones in Manitoba. Women, and particularly grandmothers, through use of beadwork, but not just women, also men would do beadwork too, but grandmothers were often invested in carrying that ability to beadwork and to teach, to write down community histories and teaching methods into beadwork. And that it would be grandmothers who would be considered some of the elders and the knowledge keepers within communities. That's a model based on a grandmother learning model, which still takes place today, with my Auntie Diane, who gives me a clup upside the head, says, hey, smarten up, as she's beading. The idea of beadwork and the idea of semiotics, sign-making, meaning-making into beadwork itself, this idea of stories, scientific knowledge, astronomy, and then ultimately botany in this case, is invested within the idea of Indigenous writing systems. But yet, you don't see a whole lot of grandmothers here. What that tells you is it tells you of a very different educational model. Power at work, most certainly. But you don't see a whole lot of grandmothers in this model. And I wonder why. I wonder what that's about. And I wonder perhaps what is it about the university that led us to celebrating the work of these men? And perhaps what might the grandmothers might have taught us as well? Because it's not that these guys didn't say important things. It's that, did they say the only important things? The last model I want to talk about in terms of teaching is the way that we build our lodges, which gets us to what an idea Indigenous university actually looks like. We build universities 4 times a year. You have to physically, everybody that participates in the educational process must participate in its building. And we build lodges 4 times a year. Sometimes, often, we'll do it once for the whole year, but we do it yearly, and that our educational institutions, we like to put all this investment into this idea of permanence, right? The idea of literacy is only valuable insofar as it squiggles on the page that we imagine that will last longer than a year, 10 years. Well, I got news for you. Books don't last forever. The idea of semiotic permanence is imaginary and an illusion. It's a Western construct. It's totally a lie. Books will just watch it fall apart on your desk. It'll just use it a few times. It'll just fall apart. Just because a semiotic lasts for 5, 6, 10, 15 years is no different than a semiotic on sand that lasts for 15 minutes, 1 hour, 4 days in the case of the Anishinaabe creation story. So these semiotics are important, and just because semiotics change, in fact, I would say that semiotics have a lot to teach us about the impermanency of themselves, and that Anishinaabe may have something to say about knowledge being always moving, always changing, and that we may imagine these books as being always unmoving as well, but actually books pretty much move too, ask any literary scholar. The creation of ongoing educational institutions is still taking place today. This is at Shingwak University. Shingwak University every year builds their own lodge. They build their own lodge with their students and their faculty who come together, and they build their educational institution. And this is what they learn from. This is what they teach from. They teach Everything from the fire, to water, to the pipe, to astronomy, to botany, to everything that an interdisciplinary university provides. Service, which brings me to my last real point. Service is a complex way. Basically, service means for a professor and for students is go out to the community. Go out, figure out what the community is interested in, and then bring it back to us. Bring some of your knowledge to the community, bring some of their knowledge in, try to find a healthy, sustainable relationship. Well, some of the work that I do is in the community involving bringing the Indigenous archive to larger venues. And this was a map that was made by an Indigenous leader in northern Manitoba called Chepewiti. And what a map maker, Thomas Fiddler, asked him is he said, Peter Fiddler asked him, he said, how do you get home? So here we are at the Paw. Tell me how you get home. So here's the Paw, here's the Paw, and there's Split Lake. How do you get home? He said, well, you can go this way, or you can go this way. These are all the people you're gonna meet along the way. Here's the names. This is Lake Winnipeg, by the way. And then you could go this way. So you go this way, or this way. Here are the different ways, but here's all the people that you're going to meet. You're going to meet this person who they just had a new baby. Hey, don't go to this community. You got some dicey stuff going on over there. Hey, go check out these people. They're doing a cool ceremony over there. Check it out. That's what he told Peter Fiddler. Now, I get the opportunity as a credentialed professor to do a lot of work in Manitoba. And remember I talked about Lake Winnipeg? Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba is doing an exponential increase in hydroelectric dams in the northern part of the province. And they have this responsibility under Canada's Constitution called Section 35, which requires that all governmental agencies on the building of things on Indigenous territories have to consult with Indigenous peoples. Okay, makes sense. So consultation, what that looks like is Manitoba says, okay, here's the kiosk generating station. We're going to build up a new hydroelectric dam. Well, First Nations in this territory are who we're going to consult with because they're the ones who are going to be affected by this dam. My argument is, no, you're wrong. Because Chepewiti told you 200 years ago. This is a map that was in 1806. This map tells you that water connects people infinitely, and that this water, to consult with First Nations, to consult with peoples in the interaction of territory, is a commitment. It's a commitment of family, and that every single person that's going to be impacted by this dam needs to be at the table. This is a service model, and that if an Indigenous university were to be formed or were to be built, we would make it on a premise of family making, and that every single person who's at the table who would be affected by a particular project, if knowledge was asked to be part of that, a consultation perhaps, not just a letter to a band office on Friday at 4 p.m., which is often how these consultations usually go, and then they end up in the Supreme Court. If we actually have a meaningful model of consultation, we would bring everyone to the table and we'd say, hey, Indigenous communities, who would be impacted by this dam? And we would look to the archive. We would look to the literate civilizations that have been in existence for tens of thousands of years and have written it down. An Indigenous university is fully embedded in every aspect of the world around it. Every aspect, from teaching, from research to service. Whether it be a sort of momentary march, or whether it be a scientific investigation in the picking of berries, or whether it be a political gathering, trying to change a country, which is my way of seeing the glass half full way of seeing the current climate. All of these things lead us to what an Indigenous university looks like. And here is the model. The model of the university has a research model. It has a research model invested in deep, scientific, rational, whatever we want to call it, investigations into creation, and that an understanding that all of it is part of a system and that they've got infinite connections, all of it. Every single part matters. We have a model that we can build, and that we can build perhaps yearly. And it even is in existence. So at the University of Manitoba, we have a beautiful building. We're not perfect by any means. But at the University of Manitoba, we have a beautiful building called Miigwech. And Miigwech is a student space originally intended to have 4 elements to it. The community, Indigenous studies, or the idea of Indigenous knowledge, student services, and then lastly, a principle that students have a say in the building. All of those parts show a full commitment to areas like land, and water, and ultimately the creation story that I told you about. The creation story is embedded within the circle room on the top right-hand side, where we have some of our classes, we have some of our meeting. Now, of course, it's a very small building, because with budgetary cuts, we only got 2 floors, where originally we were 4, but I think we're all affected in some way by different aspects of the university model. Now, as I conclude, I want us to think about other aspects of what might make a university. How might a university look like the creation story that I told you before? How might a university look like existing models that are out there, and that instead of having an argument of whether we should indigenize the university or whether we should decolonize it, what is the opportunities that we have right now to make the university that we all had dreamed was possible? What is the possibility that we can do tomorrow in the next step that you take, the next moment that you have, to make this university a meaningful place in accompaniment of the tens of thousands of years of knowledge that has happened around you, that existed within the prayer that you heard this morning, the song that was shared, in the words that were gifted to you, as well as all of the opportunities that you now have as being a treaty member of this territory. As being a treaty person of this territory, you are part of a beautiful family, and a family that is not just human beings. We think of ourselves as this apex of creation, human beings, but we're only the last people to the party. There was a whole party. Led Zeppelin was going pretty hard till we got there. And because of that, because we are the last to the party, it's actually pretty humbling to think there was a whole lot of cool stuff going on before we got there, and we got a lot to learn. We got a lot to learn. There's lots of cool stuff we can learn about it. There's even stuff happening at the party that we still can't quite figure out. They still haven't figured out how bears hibernate. Scientifically, they still haven't figured it out. Isn't that amazing? That tells you is 2 things. One is, we got a lot more to learn. Second is, mystery seems to be a fundamental part of creation. And the search for mystery, if knowledge is ever to be pursued, is the idea that mystery is amazing. Mystery is what makes us laugh. Mystery is what gives us humor. Mystery is also what keeps us coming to remind us that we can't see all of the tree. There's never a point in creation you're going to see all of a tree. You can work your butt off, but as soon as you think you see one side, you go to the other, and you're now missing the side you just saw. What's happened from the time that you left? Spontaneity, growth, possibility. Nimenwendam omayayen. It is the time for you. It is the time for you to make that step. It's the time for you to take that step at this place in this beautiful, beautiful campus that you stand on. It's also this time, this place, this moment called reconciliation. If we think hopefully about it and we think, well, what does that look like? Well, what it'll look like? It'll look like in our schools. It will look like in our young people's institutions. One of my kids goes to daycare. And I say, what does it look like there? And then ultimately, what does it look like here? What does it look like in post-secondary institutions, in your classrooms, in your research that you do, whether that be for a paper or whether it be for a shirk project? What does it look like in your service to your community when you leave, when you go outside these buildings? How does it look? Nimenwendam omayayin. You have all of the power. You have all of the power to take that next step, and it's a beautiful one. Miigwech.